Get this motherfucker out of my bank before my clients see it. Those were the words Melissa Webb said to her, seconds before her fist slammed into Ethan Carter's face, a blow that echoed through the marble lobby of Empire Trust. His loan documents were scattered around the house, leaving clients dumbfounded. Phones rang, live broadcasts began, and the incident inside spread like wildfire. What no one in the apartment realized was that the man they had just humiliated was not who Melissa Webb thought he was. And the truth, when it came out, would define her career and change the entire banking industry forever. It was 10:47 a.m. on a crisp spring morning in Manhattan, the kind of morning when the glass towers along Fifth Avenue shimmered like monuments to wealth. The Empire Trust Bank branch on Madison Avenue stood proudly among them. Marble floors polished to a mirror, shine brass fixtures gleaming beneath soft lights, and the subtle hum of conversations blending with the rhythmic tapping of heels across stone. For the executives who entered this space was a sanctuary of privilege. For the staff, it was a place of hierarchy where appearances dictated respect. And into this cathedral of commerce walked Ethan Carter, a black man in his mid-40s, wearing a modest wool coat and carrying a leather portfolio. His quiet presence should not have stirred more than a passing glance. Yet in this building, on this morning, it would set off a chain of events that no one could have imagined. He had not come to make a scene. He had not come to prove a point. All he carried were documents neatly filed in his case, financial reports, investment analyses, and minutes from board meetings. But the weight of his presence was misread from the moment he entered. The receptionist's polite smile froze into something thinner, colder. The security guard near the loan officers shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as though evaluating a potential threat. And standing at the center of it all, watching him with barely concealed disdain, was Melissa Webb, the branch manager, whose ambition had always been matched only by her arrogance. She approached with sharp strides, her voice cutting through the lobby. "You're lost," she said flatly, her gaze sweeping over him from his polished but simple shoes to the faint wear on the cuffs of his coat. "This isn't a community credit union. We don't handle walk-ins without appointments." Ethan remained calm, his voice low, steady. "I have an appointment," he said, holding his portfolio carefully at his side. "I'm here to discuss a matter of some importance." But Melissa wasn't listening. Her expression twisted as though his very presence offended her. She stepped closer, her voice louder, meant for the audience now forming in the lobby. "Get this trash out of my bank before real customers see him," she barked. And then it happened so fast that even the marble walls seemed to echo in disbelief. Her hand cracked across his cheek, the sharp sound silencing every conversation in the room. Ethan's portfolio slipped from his grasped papers, scattering across the gleaming floor like fallen leaves. Time seemed to fracture. A college student near the ATM, Emma Rivera, froze for a heartbeat, then fumbled for her phone and hit record. Gasps rippled through the air. An elderly woman by the investment desk clutched her purse closer. Two businessmen exchanged a glance uneasy, but neither stepped forward. Melissa kicked his leather portfolio toward the door, her voice rising. "Security," she shouted, pointing at him as though he were disease incarnate. "Remove this welfare case before he scares away paying clients." The words carried a venom sharpened by years of unchallenged prejudice. Ethan stood still, his cheek burning, but his eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, held their composure. He knelt to gather his papers, each movement deliberate, graceful, even under humiliation. He moved as if dignity itself were his shield, and that quiet defiance only seemed to inflame Melissa further. She puffed her chest, circling him, as if to remind everyone who held power here. "Look at him," she announced, gesturing toward his modest coat, his unassuming posture. "This is exactly the kind of person who drains our resources." Emma's live stream viewer count began to climb. Dozens became hundreds within minutes as her whispered narration filled the feed. "I can't believe this." The manager just slapped a customer in front of everyone. "This is disgusting." On screen, comments poured in furious, relentless, "Sue them. This is 2024, not 1964. Get his name. Get her face. Hashtag it now." Emma zoomed in on Melissa's name tag, broadcasting it to strangers across the city. Melissa Webb, branch manager, Empire Trust Bank. The story was no longer confined to marble walls. It was breaking free into the digital bloodstream of outrage. But inside the bank, the tension thickened. Melissa loomed closer, her perfume mixed with the bitter scent of her morning coffee, creating a nauseating cloud. Miss Antonio Delgado, head of security, began carefully addressing Ethan with a measured tone. "Is there something we can help you with?" Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but Melissa cut him off sharply. "Antonio, call back up. Code yellow. We have an aggressive individual refusing to leave. Code yellow." The words landed heavily. In security protocol, code yellow was reserved for violent threats, robberies, armed assailants, credible danger. Yet here stood Ethan Carter, crouched over his scattered documents, silently collecting them one by one. Antonio hesitated, unease flickering in his eyes. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. But Melissa's authority bore down like a commandment. Phones buzzed. Ethan's own device lit up against the marble floor. The name on the screen read, J. Morrison, board chair. He silenced it without looking, slipping the phone into his coat pocket. Melissa noticed the case leather, lined with gold corners, expensive. Her eyes narrowed. See that she sneered to the crowd. Probably stolen. That's how they afford nice things while begging for handouts. The accusation stung the air like another slap. Murmurs spread. A father pulled his young daughter behind him, shielding her from the confrontation. Customers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some pretending not to watch. Emma's live stream count soared past 2,000, her voice trembling with disbelief. She just accused him of being a drug dealer because he has a nice phone. This is blatant racism. Ethan rose, slowly, papers gathered neatly back into his portfolio. He straightened to his full height, nearly matching Melissa, his presence radiating a quiet strength that dwarfed her manufactured authority. He met her glare without a word. And in that silence, something shifted. Not enough to stop her. Her pride had driven her too far for retreat, but enough to send a chill through everyone watching. They sensed, though they did not yet know, that this man was not who Melissa thought he was. The clock above the teller stations ticked forward. 10:52 a.m. In 68 minutes, a board meeting across town was scheduled to begin. A meeting that would change everything, not only for the Empire Trust Bank, but for every person now holding their breath inside that marble lobby. Ethan Carter, The man Melissa Webb had just called trash was far more than the stranger she believed, and soon the world would know exactly who he was. The silence that followed Melissa Webb's outburst did not last long. It fractured under the soft, urgent tapping of a phone screen. Emma Rivera's live stream was no longer just a whisper into the void. It had become a broadcast feeding the public's insatiable hunger for truth and outrage. Viewers poured in by the thousands, each comment a spark in a growing blaze. By the time Ethan Carter stood upright with his documents reclaimed, over 5,000 people were watching him endure humiliation in real time. And outside the marble walls of Empire Trust Bank, the city itself was beginning to stir. Unbelievable. This is racism live. Yas banking while black trending now. Get her name. Get her badge. Expose her. The comment stream scrolled faster than Emma could read, her voice shaking as she narrated. I need everyone watching to understand this man hasn't done anything. He's calm. He's quiet. And she hit him. She actually hit him. Behind her words, the camera lens caught Ethan's stillness, the calm posture of a man absorbing cruelty without surrendering dignity. For the audience, his composure became evidence, his silence a powerful indictment of the abuse raining down on him. Inside the branch, the atmosphere was shifting. Some customers, emboldened by their own discomfort, began whispering louder. A mother with a stroller shook her head in disgust. This is shameful. She muttered her words not meant for broadcast, but captured nonetheless by Emma's microphone. An elderly couple near the vault exchanged glances torn between fear of involvement and the gnawing realization that history was repeating itself right before their eyes. The lobby was no longer a sanctuary of quiet transactions. It was a stage, and Melissa Webb, blinded by her own pride, could not see how disastrously her performance was unraveling. At the reception desk, the phone lines lit up like alarms. Janet, the receptionist, answered one after another, her voice strained. Empire Trust, Madison Branch. How can I? Yes, I understand. But I can't. Sir, please calm down. I cannot comment on another line. Blinked before she could finish. The outside world was not waiting for explanations. It was demanding accountability in real time. For every second Melissa spoke, for every insult she hurled, the storm grew louder. Sarah Park, the assistant manager, stepped forward with a kind of quiet courage born of exhaustion. She had spent years smoothing Melissa's rough edges, apologizing to staff and customers in hushed tones after her boss's arrogance bled into cruelty. But today was different. Today, the world was watching. Marcus. She began carefully, her voice low but steady. Perhaps we should move this discussion to your office, away from customers, away from cameras. She did not glance at Emma's phone, but the implication was clear. Damage control was still possible if Melissa would only retreat. Melissa snapped her head toward Sarah, her face flushed. Don't undermine me, Sarah. This is my branch, my authority. And everyone here will see that we don't tolerate. She gestured again toward Ethan, searching for the right insult, but the hesitation betrayed her. For the first time, her words faltered, and the silence that followed was filled by the relentless buzzing of phones and the muffled chatter of Emma's live viewers. Sarah lowered her gaze, retreating a half step, but the seed had been planted. Doubt was growing in the room, not only among customers, but among staff who had endured too many days under Melissa's command. Antonio Delgado, head of security, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like iron. He had been trained to respond to threats, to read body language, to identify danger before it erupted. And nothing about Ethan Carter read as dangerous. He was calm. He was deliberate. He was almost unnervingly composed. Antonio's instincts screamed that Melissa's command to call Code Yellow was not just excessive, but unethical. Still, the badge on her blazer represented authority he could not easily ignore. He shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near his radio, but never reaching for it. In 12 years of service, he had never defied a direct order. But in 12 years, he had also never witnessed a manager strike a customer and then demand their removal as though violence were policy. Meanwhile, Emma's viewer count climbed past 10,000. Comments turned from outrage to action. "I'm calling corporate right now. Tag CNN. Tag MSNBC. Somebody get the NAACP involved." Hashtags multiplied like wildfire, each one a condemnation. Fastench Empire. Trust shame. Banking while black. Fire Melissa now. Emma's phone buzzed with notifications as followers shared her live stream across platforms. What had begun as a single student's attempt to capture injustice had snowballed into a nationwide moment of reckoning. Then came the cameras. Outside, the familiar blue and white van of NBC New York pulled up to the curb, its satellite dish unfolding like the wing of a predatory bird. Reporter Lisa Chong stepped onto the sidewalk microphone, in hand cameraman trailing behind. They had been tipped off within minutes of the live stream going viral. News moved fast in New York, and nothing moved faster than scandal tied to race money and power. Through the towering glass windows of the branch, Lisa could already see the crowd forming inside phones, raised faces tense. She knew instantly this was more than a story. It was a headline waiting to explode. Back inside, Ethan remained a figure of silence, his gaze steady, his posture unbroken. He had not spoken since Melissa's slap, had not argued, had not defended himself. And yet his silence was deafening. It forced everyone in the lobby to hear only her words, her venom, her unchecked prejudice. The imbalance grew sharper with each passing second, and though Melissa thought she was winning by dominating the stage, she was in fact burying herself under the weight of her own arrogance. Mrs. Huang, the elderly immigrant who had stood quietly near the investment desk, finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with conviction. "This isn't right," she said, her accent coloring the words, but giving them no less strength. "I've seen this before. In my country. In this country. Humiliation in public is cruelty, and it is always wrong." Heads turned. A ripple moved through the crowd. For a moment, Melissa's authority wavered under the gaze of those who had once been silent. Melissa's eyes snapped toward her. "Mrs. Huang, please don't encourage this disruption. We're handling it." But the words rang hollow now. Too many eyes had seen. Too many ears had heard, and Emma's phone captured every second, her voice rising as she narrated. "Everyone, you heard that. She just dismissed a witness telling the truth. This is spiraling." The clock above the teller stations glowed 10:56 a.m. In 64 minutes, a board meeting would begin across town, its agenda already trembling under the weight of what was happening here. Ethan's phone buzzed again. J. Morrison. Board chair, persistent, insistent. He silenced it once more, his expression unreadable. The audience did not yet know what that name meant, but soon they would. For now, they only saw a man enduring injustice, while the world rushed to his defense. Outside, the crowd on Madison Avenue thickened as pedestrians stopped, drawn by whispers of what was happening inside. The reflection of flashing cameras danced across the glass facade. Inside, the atmosphere was unbearable, every second stretched taut with tension. Melissa Webb believed she was reinforcing her authority. She had no idea she was dismantling it before an audience that had already outgrown the lobby and spilled into the living rooms, offices, and phones of tens of thousands across the country. And still, Ethan Carter said nothing. His silence was not surrender. It was a storm gathering quiet and relentless, waiting for the precise moment to break. The ticking clock on the wall struck 11:00 a.m., and the atmosphere inside Empire Trust's Madison Avenue branch felt heavier than stone. Phones buzzed, live stream counters climbed, and whispers filled the air like a low tide. Melissa Webb stood rigid, convinced she was the embodiment of control, yet each word she uttered betrayed her unraveling authority. Ethan Carter, silent until now, remained a mystery to the crowd. Some saw him as a victim. Others, guided by Webb's words, still questioned his presence. But soon, the question of who he was would shatter every assumption in that lobby. Emma Rivera's live stream surged past 20,000 viewers. The comments had shifted from indignation to speculation. Who is this man? Why is he so calm? Why hasn't he fought back? Emma's phone caught the trembling hands of a young teller who dropped a stack of forms, her eyes darting nervously toward Ethan, as though she sensed something the rest of them did not. Beneath the polished surface of the branch, truth was pressing against the glass, waiting to break free. Melissa, emboldened by the silence, thrust her finger toward Ethan again. "Antonio," she demanded, "if you won't call code yellow, then escort him out yourself. This is my decision, my authority." Antonio Delgado, torn between protocol and conscience, hesitated. His eyes met Ethan's briefly. What he saw there wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was patience, the kind of patience carried only by those who know their power is greater than the insult before them. For Antonio, that moment was enough. His hand moved away from his radio. He would not enforce Melissa's command. The crowd felt the tension tighten, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Melissa's face darkened, her voice rising with desperation. "Do you all see this? This is what happens when we let people like him walk into places they don't belong." Her words echoed through the lobby, but this time they landed differently. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and whispers sharpened. She was no longer performing to an obedient audience. She was revealing herself, and the room knew it. Ethan's phone buzzed once more, the name Jay Morrison flashing across the screen for all nearby to glimpse. Melissa saw it too. Her lip curled. Of course, she sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. Drug dealers always have contacts, probably his supplier calling. The cruelty was casual, unthinking, but it was the final fracture in the room's fragile balance. Emma's live stream captured it all, and her voice trembled as she whispered to thousands watching, "She's calling him a drug dealer on camera. You're all hearing this." It was then that Ethan finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, He reached into his coat pocket, not for defense, not for retaliation, but for revelation. He withdrew a black leather wallet, and from it a laminated identification card edged in gold. He held it lightly between two fingers, letting the light catch the embossed seal, Empire Trust Bank Chief Executive Officer. His name beneath it, Ethan Carter. The silence that fell was absolute. Even Emma forgot to narrate her phone lens, shaking as her audience erupted with disbelief. Melissa froze, the words dying in her throat, her face cycling through confusion, denial, and horror. For a moment, she seemed to shrink, her authority collapsing inward under the weight of the truth. The man she had struck, humiliated, and accused of theft was not a stranger trespassing in her world. He was the leader of the entire institution she served. Ethan's voice, calm and resonant, broke the silence. "You wanted me removed from this branch, Ms. Webb," he said softly, his tone carrying more power than any shout. "But perhaps it is you who will need to leave." The words were measured, precise, and devastating. They were not the angry rebuttal Melissa had expected. They were a verdict. The crowd erupted not in noise, but in movement. Customers who had stood frozen leaned forward, their expressions shifting from passive observers to witnesses of history. Mrs. Huang's eyes filled with vindicated fire as she whispered, "I knew it." Antonio exhaled a weight lifting from his chest. Even Sarah Park, who had tried to diffuse the storm earlier, pressed a hand over her mouth in shock. The branch was no longer Melissa's stage. It belonged to Ethan now. Emma's live stream counter exploded. 50,000, then 60. Her voice finally returned, breathless, almost reverent. "Oh my God, he's the CEO. He's the actual CEO." The comments blurred into a flood of exclamations. "Plot twist of the century. This is unreal. She's finished." Hashtags morphed instantly. "CEO reveal for justice served. Your Empire Trust truth." Melissa staggered back a step, her bravado draining. "That badge," she stammered. "That can't be real. You can't just—" Her words faltered under Ethan's steady gaze. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. He tapped his phone, dialing with quiet efficiency. The line clicked, and a voice answered, immediately audible enough for those nearby to hear. "Board Chair Morrison." Ethan's reply was calm. "James, it's Carter. I won't be at the meeting yet. I'm at Madison Branch, and we have a situation." "Yes, it's as bad as you've heard. Worse, actually. Send corporate security." The murmurs in the crowd surged like a wave. Melissa's face drained of color. For the first time, fear cracked through her armor of arrogance. She looked around desperately, searching for support, but found only silence. Sarah avoided her gaze. Antonio's expression was cold. Mrs. Huang glared at her with righteous fury. Even the customers who had once shrunk from involvement now stood taller, their judgment clear. The audience she had counted on to validate her authority had abandoned her entirely. Outside, the first corporate SUVs arrived, their tinted windows reflecting the gathering crowd on the sidewalk. The atmosphere shifted again from scandal to reckoning. Inside, the digital clock ticked forward, 11:07 a.m. The board meeting that was supposed to review quarterly reports had just transformed into a crisis management session, and every second that passed tightened the noose around Melissa Webb's career. Ethan lowered his phone, slipping it back into his pocket. His expression remained calm, but there was steel beneath the serenity. He turned toward Antonio. Please ensure that all video footage from internal cameras is preserved. No one is to delete or alter anything. This incident will be reviewed in full." Antonio nodded, immediately relief flickering across his face, as though grateful to finally follow a command rooted in justice. Melissa tried once more, her voice trembling now. "Mr. Carter, I didn't recognize you." If I had known, Ethan cut her off with a quiet firmness that stilled the room. "And that is the problem, isn't it? You assume that because I did not look like the customers you expect in this branch, I did not belong. You assume that wealth has a skin color, that dignity has a dress code, that authority must look like you, not me." His words were not shouted, but they struck with more force than any blow. Each sentence dismantled the fragile excuses she had been grasping for. The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on him, every ear attuned to the resonance of truth. Emma's camera trembled as she zoomed in on Ethan's face, capturing not just his identity, but the weight of the moment, the embodiment of a man who had carried humiliation with dignity and now wielded authority with restraint. The doors opened again, and corporate security entered, led by Director Jennifer Kim. Their presence was like a final seal on the transformation of the lobby from a place of transactions into a tribunal. Jennifer's sharp eyes swept the scene, landing on Ethan first. She inclined her head with respect. "Mr. Carter, we received your call." Then turning toward Melissa, her expression hardened. "We've also received the live stream footage, and I think you know what comes next." Melissa's knees buckled slightly, the last vestiges of her authority collapsing as the truth encircled her. Ethan did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply watched his presence, a quiet reminder that justice, when it arrives, does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers with undeniable finality. The clock glowed 11:10. The board meeting would wait. The reckoning had already begun. The lobby of Empire Trust's Madison Avenue branch had transformed into something unrecognizable. What only an hour earlier had been a polished temple of quiet transactions was now a stage for accountability. The crowd of customers stood frozen in rapt attention. Emma Rivera's live stream counter ticked higher by the second, and the presence of corporate security made it clear that the moment of reckoning was no longer avoidable. Melissa Webb, once the unchallenged authority in this building, was unraveling in front of the very people she had tried to dominate. Jennifer Kim, head of corporate security, did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence carried authority the way steel carries strength. "Ms. Webb," she said evenly, "you are to surrender your employee badge and all access credentials immediately. This branch is now under investigation." The words struck with surgical precision. Melissa's hand trembled as it reached for her blazer pocket, producing the badge that had once been her symbol of control. Now, it was evidence against her, a relic of arrogance that had metastasized into abuse. Her voice faltered as she tried to salvage anything. "I was protecting the bank," she stammered. "This man." She stopped herself, realizing too late the futility of the excuse. Every word she had spoken, every insult, every false accusation was already preserved in the phones of strangers and the internal cameras Jennifer had ordered secured. There was no narrative left for her to control. Ethan Carter watched silently, his expression unreadable, yet the weight of his gaze was unbearable for her. He did not need to condemn her. She was condemning herself with every frantic glance and every whispered plea. The humiliation she had inflicted on him was now reflected back upon her, magnified by the merciless clarity of exposure. Sarah Park, standing a few feet away, felt her own breath catch as she realized her career, too, had hung in the balance. She had tried to calm the storm, tried to convince Melissa to de-escalate, but she had stopped short of true defiance. Now she understood silence had its own cost. The difference between survival and complicity was razor thin. Ethan's eyes met hers briefly, and though he said nothing, the message was clear he had noticed. She would not be forgotten. Antonio Delgado, meanwhile, felt an odd mixture of relief and regret. Relief that he had not carried out the command to call Code Yellow, regret that he had hesitated at all. But Ethan had spared him too, recognizing the weight of conscience in his refusal. For Antonio, this moment was more than a reprieve. It was a lesson etched into the marrow of his career. Authority meant nothing if divorced from justice. Outside, the glass facade reflected the flashing lights of news cameras, the growing crowd pressing against the windows to glimpse history in motion. Inside, Jennifer Kim's tone hardened. Melissa Webb, effective immediately. Your employment with Empire Trust is terminated under grounds of gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and racial discrimination. You will be escorted to your office to collect personal belongings under supervision. You are prohibited from contacting staff or accessing company systems. The words landed like hammer blows. Melissa's legs weakened her once rigid posture, crumpling under the truth. She glanced around the lobby, desperate for sympathy, for rescue, but none came. Not from her staff, not from the customers, not even from the security team that had once enforced her commands. The authority she had wielded for 12 years dissolved in the span of minutes. Emma's camera zoomed in as Melissa handed over her badge, her face ashen, her hands shaking. It's over, Emma whispered into her live stream. She's done. She's really done. The comments exploded in real time, millions of strangers across the country, bearing witness to the fall of a woman who had once believed she was untouchable. The financial impact rippled instantly. Ethan's phone buzzed with updates from crisis management. Empire Trust's stock was plunging, headlines were erupting. Institutional investors were demanding statements. What had begun as a single slap in a marble lobby had now shaken the foundations of the entire corporation. Yet amid the chaos, Ethan's presence steadied the room. He did not seek vengeance. He sought transformation. Melissa was led past him, her cardboard box of personal effects cradled in her arms. For the first time, her eyes met his, not with contempt, but with a hollow plea. Please, she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Don't let this define me. Ethan's reply was quiet, almost tender, but unyielding. It already has. The only choice you had was how. The words followed her as security guided her out through the glass doors, her career dissolving behind her like smoke. Customers turned their heads to watch her exit, some with grim satisfaction, others with quiet pity. But no one stopped her. No one intervened. Authority built on fear had no allies once the fear was gone. When the doors closed behind her, silence lingered. Ethan turned to the remaining staff and customers, his voice calm but resolute. This is not the end, he said. This is the beginning. What happened here today will not be hidden. It will not be excused. It will be the catalyst for change, not just in this branch, but across this institution. His words carried a promise heavier than punishment, a vision larger than retribution. The crowd felt it, the staff absorbed it, and Emma's live stream audience erupted with support. At 11:18 a.m., the marble lobby of Empire Trust no longer belonged to Melissa Webb or the fear she had cultivated. It belonged to the truth and to the man who had carried it with quiet strength until the moment it could no longer be denied. Her career had collapsed. His mission was just beginning. By the time the doors of Empire Trust's Madison Avenue branch closed behind Melissa Webb, the scandal had already outgrown the marble lobby where it began. News alerts blared across television screens, headlines scrolled across financial tickers, and Emma Rivera's live stream, now replayed by millions, was being dissected on morning talk shows and primetime broadcasts alike. What had begun as a single act of arrogance was no longer a local embarrassment. It was a national reckoning. Ethan Carter understood the magnitude of the moment. As CEO, he knew the institution's reputation, its credibility, and even its financial stability now hung in the balance. Yet as a man who had endured humiliation in silence, he knew the opportunity was greater than any crisis. Scandals destroy companies, he told the board later that afternoon. But reform saves them. And if we are willing to face the truth head on, this can be the turning point. The boardroom that day was tense, but Ethan's voice carried the weight of conviction. He outlined reforms that went beyond apologies and press releases. Every branch would undergo mandatory anti-bias training. Complaint procedures would be transparent and independently monitored. Customer service protocols would be rewritten to guarantee identical treatment regardless of race attire or economic background. And to ensure accountability, Empire Trust would publish quarterly reports on progress open to the public. We cannot hide from what happened, he said. We must rebuild trust in plain view. What struck the board most was not just the clarity of his plan, but the calmness of his presence. He had been humiliated in front of the world, and yet he stood before them not as a victim, but as a leader intent on turning pain into progress. His restraint gave his words a moral authority no financial projection could match. By the time he finished, even the skeptics around the table had no counter-argument. They approved his proposals unanimously. In the weeks that followed, the transformation began. Branch 47, the scene of the scandal, was redesigned as the pilot location for what Ethan named the Dignity Banking Initiative. Employees underwent rigorous training, not in sterile conference rooms, but through real-world simulations that forced them to confront their own biases. Community leaders were invited to serve on advisory boards, ensuring the voices of those most often silenced were now central to decision-making. Security teams were retrained to view customers as individuals, not categories, and to prioritize de-escalation over intimidation. Customers returned not with skepticism, but with curiosity. They wanted to see if the promises were real. And slowly, trust began to rebuild. Families who had once avoided the branch now brought their children to open accounts. Professionals of color, who had quietly endured slights for years, spoke openly about how different the service felt. And in the quiet satisfaction surveys, a truth emerged. Respect was measurable, and it was rising. Emma Rivera, once a college student capturing injustice on her phone, became a symbol of the power of ordinary people to demand change. She was invited to speak on panels about social justice in the digital age, and her live stream was studied in business schools as an example of how transparency can reshape entire industries. Mrs. Huang, who had spoken up when others stayed silent, became a beloved figure in the narrative her courage cited in company training sessions. Antonio Delgado and Sarah Park were both promoted their names attached not to scandal, but to the values of conscience and professionalism. And Ethan Carter, though praised, widely remained steady in his message. This is not about one manager's downfall. It is about building a system where dignity is not negotiable. His words resonated because they carried the weight of lived experience. He had felt the sting of injustice, yet he had chosen to respond not with vengeance, but with reform. 6 months later, Empire Trust stood not as a company broken by scandal, but as one transformed by it. Its market value had recovered, its reputation had shifted, and its policies were being imitated across industries. The marble plaque at the Madison Avenue branch read simply, "Dignity Banking Initiative, where change began." For those who walked through its doors, it was more than a slogan. It was proof that even in the heart of humiliation, reform was possible, and that justice, when demanded by many, could outlast the arrogance of one. The story of Ethan Carter began in humiliation, but ended in transformation. What started as a routine morning at Empire Trust's Madison Avenue branch spiraled into a national spectacle when Melissa Webb's arrogance collided with Ethan's quiet dignity. She saw a man she believed did not belong, judged him by his skin, his attire, and her own prejudice. She used her authority to demean him, publicly convinced her words would stand unchallenged. But the cameras were watching, and the truth was stronger than her power. In the moment of greatest humiliation, Ethan chose silence, restraint, and patience. When the truth emerged that he was not just a customer, but the CEO of the very institution she claimed to protect, the story took a turn no one expected. Melissa's career collapsed in front of the world, but what mattered most was not her fall. It was what Ethan did with that moment. He could have chosen revenge. He could have silenced the scandal quietly behind boardroom doors. Instead, he chose reform. He turned the cameras of outrage into instruments of accountability. He transformed one manager's cruelty into a movement that reshaped an entire company, forcing it to confront systemic bias and commit to dignity for every customer. And because of that choice, Empire Trust did not crumble. It changed. The lesson is clear: injustice does not define us by its presence, but by how we respond to it. Ethan's story reminds us that power lies not only in titles or positions, but in the courage to stand for dignity when it is most at risk. For the audience, the takeaway is both personal and practical. In your workplace, in your community, even in your daily interactions, you have a choice. Will you stay silent when you witness unfairness? Or will you, like Emma with her live stream, or Mrs. Huang with her words, speak and act in ways that create change? This story is not just about a CEO or a bank. It is about us, all of us, and the responsibility we share to make dignity the standard, not the exception. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about your own role in creating justice, then join us. Subscribe to the channel, share these stories, and help us keep telling the narratives that shine a light on both injustice and hope. Your support is what keeps these stories alive and what helps us build the courage to tell the next one.